My name is Tony Yang. I head up growth here at Mucker Capital. And if you've been in some of these webinars that we've done in the past several months, you'll know that every so often we invite a guest speaker, a subject matter expert, someone that we partner with to come in and talk to us about a certain area that is top of mind for many of our portfolio companies. And so today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Sally. Before we hop into the official intros, we're going to be talking about building a sales development function, an SDR function for early stage startups. And I just want to say that a lot of the companies that I spend regular time with in our portfolio, this is one of the key areas that we do talk a lot about. And so this is a very relevant and timely topic, especially for many of our portfolio companies. So super excited, Sally, to have you here. Let's go to the next slide to cover a few housekeeping items. Okay, so probably the number one question that is always asked in the webinar is, are we recording? Yes, we are. And so we are recording the full webinar session, which we will then provide up on our blog in a few days' time. So if you're a regular subscriber to Mucker's blog, you'll probably get some sort of notice in our monthly newsletter, or simply just check back in a few days' time, and you'll be able to see the full recording as well as a summary on our blog post. So make sure that you go and subscribe at mucker.com. And then secondly, I mentioned this at the beginning of the webinar. For those of you who just joined, there is a Q&A box. It's not called a chat box, but there's a Q&A box or a button in your Zoom UI. And at any time during the presentation, if you have a question, feel free to ask that question by entering into the chat box, and we'll either address it during the course of our presentation, or we'll reserve time at the end dedicated for Q&A. So those are the two housekeeping items. All right, now let's get to the good stuff. As I mentioned, I'm Tony Yang, head of growth here at Mucker, which basically means I get to spend time with many of our founders in our portfolios companies, and to essentially help guide them on the areas of growth. And one of those key areas is around sales development. And that's why I'm super excited to have Sally Duby here. Sally is the Chief Sales Officer at a firm called the Bridge Group. And if you haven't heard of the Bridge Group, they're a fantastic firm, advisory research firm that focuses specifically on sales and sales development. And every year they actually put out a benchmark report, which I'm excited for Sally to share some of the findings in their most recent report. So Sally, welcome. So happy to have you here, and I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Tony. It's awesome to be here. And this is one of my favorite topics, is talking about sales development. There's so much power in sales development, but there is a method to the madness, if you will, with sales development. And it is that, fine line between art and science, and getting it both right to making it work as effectively and efficiently as you can for a company. And I go way back in doing this before I think people even realized that sales development was around. But when I worked at Oracle many moons ago in the late 80s, we actually had a sales development team. And so sales development has been around for a long time. We've perfected it, but I've lived and breathed it since those days at Oracle, and directing a team of 25 college grads. and so there's a lot that's changed, but a lot that has stayed the same to make it operate effectively. Okay. So we're going to move on and talk about some of the common questions and issues that I know Tony gets asked a lot from the portfolio, as well as what I get asked a lot working at the Bridge Group and talking to numerous tech companies. So we're going to talk about what's the right strategy and models to make SDR successful. We're going to talk about the whole people component. What kind of person should you hire when you're getting started? Compensation, quotas, management, all of that kind of fun stuff. And then we're going to go through some benchmarks as well from our surveys. As Tony mentioned, Every year we do a survey of B2B tech companies. And this year in February, we released our SDR benchmark report that talks about activities, trends, what's working, the compensation for them. And then next year we'll release a survey, a new updated survey on SaaS sales. Same kind of benchmarks, trends, activities, and compensation for SaaS sales teams. So we're going to be talking a lot about stuff that is backed up by our industry benchmark reports. So without further ado, let's jump in because we've got a lot of information to get to. So I know a lot of times we get asked, especially when we're transitioning from founder-led sales to actually bringing in sales, do you hire an SDR or an outsourced agency? Do you hire an AE or an SDR first? There's not always this is how you do it, right? There are a lot of variables involved. But in general, if you have inbound leads, you can probably go ahead and hire an AE versus an SDR, depending on how many inbound leads you have and if they really are the right fit. Are those inbound leads coming from your right ideal customer profile or ICP? Are they from the right buyers? That you can just then hand those over to your AEs. If you have no inbound leads, and you're going to have to do outbound prospecting to develop pipeline, hire an SDR first. Most AEs, one of their first questions is going to be, are there any leads? And if you say no, many of those AEs are going to be like, thanks, but I'm moving on. Tony, I'm sure you hear that a lot.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's also probably a question that precedes this even that I hear even more frequently, which is for a lot of our early stage companies where they're trying to figure out when to transition from a founder-led sales approach because when the founders just have to do everything and they don't have any salespeople or an SDR, when would be a good time to hire an SDR or an AE or an agency? And so I don't know if you have an opinion on that, a point of view. I'm sure you do, Sally. I certainly do as well. And
Yes.
we advise our portfolio companies basically just to make sure that you find, if there's product and market fit, or at least some indication of product market fit, because there is value for a founder to do some prospecting, some sales calls as a learning process, right? And so,
Absolutely.
yeah, so I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on specifically when should a startup or a founder begin to hire as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so that is, an interesting question. And it does revolve around product market fit. And when you are ready to acquire more customers in a repeatable fashion to get those new customers on board, and you think you really have identified who your ideal customer profile is, who those ideal buyers are within that ideal customer profile, and that you have some type of messaging and understanding of what the challenges are that you are solving that is of real interest to those people. That's when I think you're ready to hire, whether it's an SDR or an AE. I think if you're still testing and trying to figure that out, I think it's really hard to hire a person as an employee to do that unless they come in and they're specifically experienced in knowing how to do that and how to help you bring out what is working, what's not working, how do we get to that repeatable fashion. So like if you're looking to hire your first SDR, again, if you've got that product market fit, you can identify who your ideal customer profile is. You can identify the buyers within that and some messaging. You can go ahead and hire an SDR. If you're still unsure about that, or you've got no one to manage, coach, and track an SDR, and there's not really a career path for that SDR to move on in 9 to 12 months, I would consider outsourcing. But keep in mind, if you outsource, you have to be able to manage them, and you have to be able to provide them with all of the same stuff you would be able to provide an internal person. So you can't just hire them and say, hey, we want you to find prospects and give them general and then just let them loose. They're not going to be successful, and you're going to pay a lot of money and you're not going to get any results. So keep that in mind. We also like to, and let me just say one thing too about your ideal customer profile. I think one of the biggest challenges early stage founders have is thinking that they've got it made because their product is horizontal and everybody and their brother in the world can buy their product, which in some ways that's awesome, but that's probably not awesome until you're close to $1 billion company. It's really difficult when you're a small company and you have one resource or even 2 resources or even 10 to go after the whole universe. So we have a motto here at the Bridge Group is those that focus are those that win. You've got to be very narrowly focused as to where there's some low-hanging fruit, where you've got maybe a few of those early companies that have joined you, whether they were from friends, family, network, and the VCs that have come aboard. But those are the ones you really want to look at and figure out if those are good targets. Don't go after a horizontal approach. You'll be hard pressed to be successful. So again, we like to say that whenever you're going to hire for an SDR or even an AE, if you can hire a minimum of 2 at the same time, it's wonderful. Number one, the training involved that you have to do is very time and resource intensive for you, and you as the CEO are probably doing a lot of that training. And so your time is extremely valuable. A lot better to train a couple of people than just one at a time. It also gives you a baseline for understanding, because sometimes we do make mistakes in hiring. People, if you're hiring an AE, they're probably really good at selling themselves, but they may not be exactly what you need at this point in time. And so it helps you to understand if you hire 2 of the same role, if one is doing well at it and one's not, there's some baseline there for you to say, okay, let's figure out and dive deep into what is that one person that's doing well. What are they doing? And what can we replicate on the second person to try to get them to improve, right? What's the difference? Or maybe it's just that other person that's not doing well was not a good hire and it's time to cut them loose. But without that, if you hired the one person only who didn't do well, there's so many questions that come up. Was it the person? Was it our process? Was it our messaging? Was it the market we're going after? There's so many variables that it's really hard to identify what was the problem, or the biggest problem, I should say. I know, Tony, you get asked this a lot, and we do. Should we hire our first sales leader? Or do we hire a fractional CRO? When do we hire our first sales leader? So we like to think of this as that when you've got 2 or more AEs and 2 or more SDRs, and you're starting to hit that 1 million ARR run rate, you're at a point where really having a sales leader is going to be valuable, that they can come in and help manage and help you expand and continue on that trajectory of getting up and past the 1 million ARR. Below those numbers, I would tend to look at maybe a fractional, but you definitely want to have some AEs or SDRs in place so that there is actually that hands-on. They're out selling, they're out doing it. Tony, anything that you want to add that's different on that, or how you think about it?
Yeah, so there's a lot of layers to that question. One of the main factors is also, what stage is the startup at, and how much money in the bank they have to spare. How do they manage their burn rate and expenses? And people are expensive, especially someone at a CRO level. And so, I think generally speaking, what I agree with you, if there is an existing go-to-market team with a couple of sellers and or SDRs, and that team is starting to become or require a little bit more time to manage than a founder who has to make sure the other parts of the business is running. I think that's a good time to hire a sales leader. In regards to fractional CRO or even CMOs or any type of fractional C level, I think those are good options. The key thing to look for, especially for startups that are at the very earliest stages, is finding someone who could be a player coach, because you don't want to hire a very senior level, deeply experienced CRO or even a fractional person if they, the bulk of their experience, especially in the last, let's say, decade, was working for Fortune 500 companies, and they're so far removed from the day-to-day of, hand-to-hand combat in sales capacity and be able to coach and guide a small, scrappy team. You definitely don't want to look for that type of profile. So I've always recommended for companies that are looking to bring on, let's say, a fractional leader, to find someone who can be that player coach the existing team members, but also have the ability to step in and work on deals and close deals. Because guess what? Especially if you're focused on an enterprise market, you're selling up market, you're going to need someone senior, experienced. A lot of times it's even bringing in, yourself as the founder, but knowing how to navigate that and to do it, not just, set the high level strategy. I think that's what you're looking for. Going back to the question number 2, how many SDRs do you hire? I think you brought up some great points, Sally. Another reason why I believe it's a good idea to hire more than one to start is, especially for SDRs, maybe AEs, they're more experienced. I think the experienced AEs, they can handle the amount of stress and the burden of being the only seller. But a lot of times SDRs typically have a profile of being someone who's less experienced, perhaps fresh out of college or a few years removed, could be their first job or maybe their second. And whether or not that's the right profile for an SDR, that's another discussion. But in that type of profile, the role of an SDR is very lonely. And it's a grind, especially if SDRs are doing outbound, right? And so from a psychological standpoint, even hiring more than one where they could have some sort of buddy system, that helps tremendously. Because if it's just one person and the whole success of an outbound campaign falls on the shoulders, some poor kid who just graduated college a year ago, that's a lot of stress, right?
Yes,
And
yep.
there's high burnout and high turnover for an SDR role. And so, set them up for success. And one of the ways is have someone that they could, be a buddy with and learn together. So I've always advocated to, if you're going to hire two,
Absolutely. Great points. One of the other things, just to give you some idea of and we're going to get into more of this in detail a little bit later on, but one SDR can handle about 250 inbound leads per month. Of course, some of this is really dependent on how many touch points over what length the time they're going to be executing their sequence or cadence. But in general, that's a good rule of thumb. If you have inbound leads, they can handle in the neighborhood of 2 to 275 accounts if they're just doing outbound prospecting per month, one SDR. But some of that is very dependent on how many different contacts or roles within that company they're going to go after. Is it a 1-to-1 ratio? Are there 5 contacts or roles per company that they're going to go after? Then that would be much lower on the lower end of the spectrum of number of accounts. So those are all things that come into play. A big thing to consider is, marketing. If you're ready to add SDRs and AEs, then, you really do need to have marketing in place to help with content, messaging, help educate the market, building brand and awareness. Those are all critical things that a lot of AEs are going to look for. If you are evangelizing in a market, what kind of content do you have that your AEs and SDRs can utilize to help with that evangelizing and educating the market? So don't underestimate the role of marketing at all in these early stages. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about really the people process. What's the hiring process look like? What kind of talent should you hire early on? Where can you find them? And then ramping up. So, here's a little checklist for you. What we would recommend at this early stage is to hire somebody that's got experience, especially an outbound experience. Unless you've got a ton of leads coming in and they're not going to have to do any outbound at all, which is typically unusual for this stage of company to have that much inbound coming in. However, the reason that we say that is if you hire someone fresh out of college, yes, they're going to be less expensive than somebody with experience, and there's a lot more of those to find. However, you're going to have to teach them everything. You're going to have to absolutely everything. They have no idea what this role entails. They don't even know if they really want this role. They may, bail out after 3 to 4 months after finding out they have to make 50 phone calls a day, 5 days a week, kind of thing. So, get somebody that has done a lot of outbound prospecting before, has at least 3 years experience. As Tony also alluded to, in your sales leadership candidate, avoid candidates from larger companies. They are used to walking in with name brand recognition, the brand awareness. People know typically what the market they're in, where you may not have any of those things going for you. And they have no idea how to handle that and position that if you walk in to an organization that has never ever heard of your company or even the market category that you are in. So you want people that can problem solve and have a very proactive mentality. Again, it's going to cost you more. We're going to go into some comp plans in detail a little bit later for this. Again, the experience is big, and it's somebody that's in a smaller company, again, not a known, not a sales force, if you will. You want to really give them a practical assessment, and I've got some details a little bit later about how to interview, but do some mock calls, really evaluate their ability to perform some of these tasks. Again, look for candidates who are really comfortable on the phone. This is not email spamming, guys. Email response rates have plummeted since COVID. They are down at about the 1% rate, where if you can do phone calls and you get the right contact information, you can have an 8 to 12% connect rate. So huge difference. And, again, look for candidates that understand prospecting and can talk to you about what they do, how they do it, what's important to them, because you can teach people about your product and industry. That's the easy stuff. But the hard stuff is, do they really get prospecting and what that takes to be successful? Okay, so some traits to look for in SDRs that
Sally,
yeah.
If I could just add one thing, I don't want to derail because we do have a lot to cover. I'm just mindful of time. But going back to this, the comment about hiring someone who's done it before, I think there's also, earlier we mentioned the option of hiring an agency. There are agencies out there that actually have a model where you hire them and they're doing your, SDR, sales development work for you. Some of them do have the option of allowing you to hire the SDR that is signed to you after the contract. It's part of their model.
Yep.
And so there's a benefit to that, because a lot of times some of these organizations, they hire, perhaps young or less experienced people to fill these SDR roles, but they go through a training process or program. And so you're, as a someone who's working with them as a client, you're getting the benefit of getting SDRs who are trained, and then as they're working with you on your business and setting outbound and all the stuff, they're already getting experience with your particular business and industry. So sometimes that's a very viable option, depending on how things are set up, how much an agency charges. We certainly have a few that we can recommend. If there's anyone interested in that, feel free to ping me afterwards. But I just wanted to mention that, because
Absolutely.
that is an option.
Nope. Good point. Good point. Okay. So moving on, what to look for. Want to be curious. Do they ask a lot of questions? Do they take feedback well? When you give them any coaching advice, direction, are they able to be very proactive? Again, we don't want anybody who's just sitting back waiting for, an email to come to them saying they want to learn more. How motivated are they? Are they grit? Are they very determined? And can they establish that really good relationship and be empathetic with the people on the other end of the phone call or the email or the LinkedIn from them? So just a few of the key traits, but I really like the curious and the coachable, as well as the resilient, because they're going to hear a lot of no. And they have to just be able to let it roll right off their shoulder and move on. Some tips for interviewing reps with or without SDR experience. Again, I highly stress you get somebody with SDR experience if you're going to do this yourself internally, but have them give you some of their prospecting emails that they've used at their current job. Even if it has nothing to do with you guys, doesn't matter. Just check their writing skills. Is it compelling? If you got this email, would you be interested to learn more? Always interview by phone. Listen to their phone etiquette. Are they good at listening? Are they good at getting a relationship established and asking you questions? Have them walk you through what they do every day and what's their best performing sequence or cadence. How many steps? What's the different medium? Or is it a phone, a LinkedIn, a text, whatever? What are the different ones they're using, and what's the messaging? The messaging is critical to making this work. Again, some questions you can ask them. What's your research process? How much time do they spend? What do they do with that information once they find it? Do they customize? Do they personalize? What questions would they ask to qualify a prospect? And this can all be around, again, it doesn't have to be for your job because they don't necessarily know your product and market. That's okay. But what they're doing currently, what happens when they get a no? Why do they love working as an SDR? And what's the hardest part? Just some questions to ask and get into their thought process and what they're looking for. Also, a lot of SDRs are really interested in an advancement. It could be as an AE, but it doesn't have to be. We are finding more and more SDRs, once they really understand what the AE job is, they aren't as interested in it as they thought. But there's opportunities for them in marketing, in operations, in enablement. So there's other areas that you could look at in promoting them or moving them into other roles. And the thing I would say is you need to move quickly when you're interviewing for SDRs. Even though there's a lot out there available today, but they are used to moving quickly, not waiting around for 6 or 8 weeks for you to make up a decision. They'll be off and going on to something else by then. Sourcing of SDRs, your network and employees are great. If you have any sales reps, ask them, who were some of the best SDRs that they worked with and why. Contact them. Of course, LinkedIn groups. And there's a bunch of sales communities like Sales Hackers, Revenue Genius, SDR Nation that are great sources for putting job posts, any job sites, but also look at your competitors or partners. Go on LinkedIn and, type in a query and look for, and, have somebody reach out, or you reach out to them, which are also, great sources for that. Tony, anything else to add on any of that?
No, I think,
Okay.
yeah, it's pretty comprehensive.
Okay. So one thing that I do want to point out is that, yes, there is a ramp time for SDRs, just like there are for sales reps. It's typically not as long, depending on the market segment your sales team is selling into, but it is a little over 3 months for an SDR to come in, get trained, start to put out calls and emails before they can generate the ideal number of meetings and pipeline from start to finish. So you will see activity, of course, way before the 3 months. You'll even see maybe a meeting or 2 or 3 set. But if you're expecting 10 meetings a month from them, they're not going to start hitting that stride until really month 4. You got to be able to give it time. Don't think again that this is instantaneous, that it's going to be, I'm going to hire an SDR, I'm going to put them on the phones or email, and boom, bam, I'm inundated with leads. It takes time to do it. Okay, let's talk now about some of the management, the comp, the benchmarks, all the details, the model, the metrics that we're going to get into. One of the things that I do want to point out, because we've been involved with some companies where we've helped them build their first SDR team, and they had no phones. It's a problem. You need your SDRs to be able to make phone calls. They need a CRM. You don't want to do this and expect that they can work off of spreadsheets and that they're going to produce the kind of results and do the activity that you're going to expect them to if they're working off of spreadsheets. So you do need some basics in place. You got to have some data sources. The more you expect them to go out and search and find, accounts within your ideal customer profile, find the buyers and the contacts, the more research that they have to do on that and bring them into this CRM, the less time they're going to have to actually reach out to these people and get meetings set up. So there's some downsides to if you're expecting them to do all of this. Again, you can cut your results and your productivity drastically if they have to do that much heavy lifting. Again, they need a way to make phone calls. Phoning is so critical today. And at some point in time, having some type of sales engagement tool where you can build a sequence that guides them and directs them through every step and stage of what they do, what they say is critical. I know a lot of early stage companies use Apollo, Reply.io, potentially even HubSpot if they're using that for marketing in their CRM. You can use that. And FrontSpin is a tool that allows you to do phone calling, plus it does allow you to do sequences. And these are tools that are less expensive than the more common names like SalesLoft and Outreach and so on that are pretty expensive these days.
Yeah, and, if I could just add a reminder for founders that are in our portfolio, reminder that we do have perks and discounts for several tools within our founder portal, tools like Apollo and HubSpot and a few of the other ones. So if you have yet to check it out, definitely do that and take advantage of some of these perks that Mucker portfolio companies get. And then secondly, also within the founder portal, we do have resources in this growth guide or playbook section that some of you probably have already seen. And so in that growth playbook in various sections, there are ways to help you know or figure out how to build a list for outbound, right? And so yes, there are tools out there like ZoomInfo and Apollo that you could source, and as well as LinkedIn, but there's other ways that you could source data, and we have a lot of content around that. So definitely check that out if you haven't already.
Awesome. And don't forget on this, cell phone numbers are really critical and important in today's world, since a lot of people still not are back in office. And so there's a company out there called Modigi that does nothing but provide cell phone numbers, and they are the most accurate. They have the highest rate of cell phone numbers to contact that I've seen out there. But if you've got an SDR who's calling a general dial or general office line, it's not going to work and they're not going to be real successful. They're going to waste a lot of time. Even direct dial numbers are not real fruitful these days. You want to go where your prospects are. Okay, so inbound lead stage definitions, everybody's got a little bit different funnel, but the key thing is that between sales and marketing, everybody involved needs to have the same understanding and the same terminology in place. Here's a common one that we see, you know, from the MQL to SQL. The sales accepted lead is when the meeting has actually happened and is moving on to the next step. And then a sales qualified opportunity is when after that meeting, the sales team has said, yes, we're moving this in to an opportunity, right? And it's now in the pipeline. Sometimes we see people go from SQL to just one step. It can be the SAL or SQL, whatever you want to do it. It just combines it all into one instead of having two different steps. But again, these are the most common. The key thing here is, again, pick something and make sure everybody understands what the terms are and everybody uses the same terms the same way. And then here's a funnel for outbound lead stage, mostly because you know, you don't have MQLs when you're doing outbound prospecting. That's totally a marketing inbound lead thing. So you can call it you know, a target or a prospect list, right? And then everything else happens the same from there. But you really want to be able to track and measure what came from outbound versus what came from inbound if you're lucky enough to have both. Okay, so this is an eye chart, but this is how we look at it to set expectations and understanding about what can one SDR do in outbound prospecting, what can they contribute to the pipeline, what can they contribute to closed won business. This is based off of an average deal size of around $30,000. This does come from our benchmarking reports, basically. So if you look down below, it's got the model variables here about how many days in a month did we use, that there was a 5% conversion to a connect rate, the number of people that you actually talk to that connect to setting a meeting, the people that then show up to the meeting and go to the next stage in the pipeline, and then how many are closed won. So these are the basic benchmarks from, again, our benchmark report for this average deal size. So as you can see, and this is for a fully ramped rep. So these numbers for the first year of an SDR would be lower because it's going to take them a 3.5 month time to ramp up to achieve these numbers on a steady state. As we know today, since COVID, the number of activities an SDR needs to do went from 75 to 100 every day. Lots of activities, lots of things they need to do. So the reason why they need a CRM, a sales engagement tool, to help them be able to do this number of activities to get the desired results. So to give you an idea, this would say that, you know, they could set 15 meetings per month, one SDR, and that 8 of them would move on to the next stage in the pipeline, and you would close 2 of those at a 25% close rate. So over the course of the year, they could add 2.7 million to the pipeline, and about 675,000 would close from the SDR activity. Again, this is per one SDR per day, per month, per year, based on $30,000 average deal size. We have a saying at the Bridge Group that I do want to point out: with inbound, you get what you get. With outbound, you get what you want. Meaning you can be a lot more focused and targeted and go after what you want. With inbound, we do tend to see that inbound drives a lot of low dollar deal sizes. And for a lot of companies, those are the deals that tend to churn the quickest and the most as well. So be cautious of inbound.
Great, Sally. So I've commented that, but one quick point of clarification. So would you say on this chart where it says stage 0, is that equivalent to a booked meeting or a demo set? Is that what you would define as a stage
That would
0?
be a booked meeting. Yeah, or it could be a demo, a demo set. Yeah, a demo on the
Yep.
calendar, but it's something that's on the calendar.
Yep. Yep. Great. And then my comment about inbound versus outbound, in my point of view, at the end of the day, those are just how prospects engage with you, right? And so now there's a whole nother category at some point where we may possibly do another growth series webinar on the topic of, account-based marketing. That's been a hot topic, in the last decade,
Yes.
I say, right? And so, in my experience, yes, depending on the channel that you're utilizing where prospects or leads are coming in from inbound, you're going to get, unqualified. But, that this is a part of the reason why account-based marketing as a go-to-market strategy can help reduce the amount of noise. And whether you call it inbound and outbound, and when you're selling to, enterprise or named account, and you're working together with your entire go-to-market strategy, in my opinion, it's I think I forget, it might have been I forget, either Dave Delaney or I don't know, someone else who calls it all bound, not just inbound or outbound. He calls it outbound, all bound. Sorry. And
That's when
so
you're doing both. Yes.
yeah,
When you're doing both. Yeah.
yeah. At the end of the day, it's about how do you engage with the right prospects that you're trying to focus on. So
Yep.
we'll probably do another series or topic on that specifically. But yeah, thanks for pointing that out. Yep.
So this is the same model for outbound prospecting, but it's using a more of an enterprise average deal size of 100,000. So you can see how different that the model works, the different goals and quotas. The other thing I do want to point out, the more you get into the enterprise, the more you're calling into larger companies, larger deal sizes, the less inbound works. So if you look at our AE benchmark reports, every time we produce them, it's the same thing. As your ACV rises, marketing contribution lowers, and you have more contribution from outbound SDRs. So it's a really big thing. You don't find many CIOs, CTOs, or VPs of finance that are willing to spend a couple $100,000 in a deal with you that are filling out a contact us form, right? So outbound works much better and is more effective the higher the ACV. So same kind of model. I did do less phone calls, or I shouldn't say just phone calls, but less outreach attempts per day per SDR, lower connect rates. When you're calling into larger companies, you're probably calling in with these kind of deal sizes with, again, a bigger title, a C or a VP level title. And so your connect are going to go down percentages. So here's the variables down at the bottom again that we are working with, and a lower close rate. But as you can see, because of the deal size, one SDR, again, fully ramped, can produce almost a $6 million pipeline per SDR per year. And you may be able to close around 864,000 out of that. So it's 58 deals and opportunities that may go into the pipeline, and your sales team will close 9 of those to the tune of 864,000. Okay. So that's how that works. And just again, some idea on this model, I would look at giving my SDR a quota of setting 10 meetings per month, with 5 of them moving into the pipeline per month. Okay. Activities. What do you want to track and measure for SDR activities? So, and these are like by day, by month. So I won't go through all of these, but again, there's a lot of activities, not just it's total activities between whatever activities they're doing. Again, phone, voicemail, LinkedIn, email, whatever, doing texting. If you've got the right audience for that, you want to be able to track all those activities. You want to be able to track, are they doing enough phone calls? We've run into some teams that are only doing 10, 20 calls a week, and they're struggling. And that's one of the biggest reasons they're struggling. Meaningful conversations. Do they actually talk to the person that they wanted to talk to? How many of those are they having every day, every week, every month? So those, again, kinds of things. How many meetings are they scheduling? Also want to track no-shows, right? Or do we have the right processes set up? Did they get to give them enough of a reason as to why they want to talk to you? Then the conversions, right? How many of those outreaches are moving to a connect? How many are going from an MQL to an SQL, or from that target prospect to an SQL, and so on, right? When you get into the sales side, not only do you want to track how many did you win, but why did you lose? What are the reasons for losing? So some details around that. And then your pipeline, so you can understand if you are getting inbound, are you getting the right inbound? What campaigns are working? What aren't? What lists are working right? What leads are getting stuck? What's the conversion rate? What's the lead aging, the time to respond? We all know if you are getting some inbound, the quicker you can respond, the better. And so you want to make sure that that is being prioritized. And again, where are you getting your best leads from? What kind of campaigns, or the source of the lead, or the list is all critical stuff. So just some things to keep an eye on. Here's some information from more information from our benchmark reports. So this was from our 2023 report. And we looked at companies that were in the 1 to 5 million range in revenue. And we compared what are the top 20% doing in that category, in that cohort, versus the bottom 60%. And there was about 100 B2B tech companies in that cohort that this data is coming from. So again, if you look at what was the median average contract value in the top 20%, it was about 16% more than the bottom 60%. So it was about $37,000 versus $32,000. And the median pipeline generated per SDR, there was a huge difference. It was 3.6 million versus 1.9 million. So they were doing more. So as the bottom slide shows, they were passing, SDRs in the top 20% are passing more meetings that are converting at a higher rate. So they passed on average 14 meetings per month that converted to almost 9 into the pipeline per month, versus that was almost, it's almost double what the bottom 60% were doing. Let's see, SDR to AE ratios, it was almost a 1 AE to, it was almost a 1-to-1, if you will, on the top 20%, right? So you want to, and that's where in the very early stages, it is important, especially if you're doing outbound prospecting, to have more of that 1-to-1 ratio of SDRs to AEs, so they can supply enough pipeline to make that AE successful and be able to go out and sell. Again, accounts per month. So in the top 20%, they were working a lot fewer accounts, but they had more contacts per account. So they were doing a little more research, more customization, and talking to more people within the account. There was also, I think we've got some questions, so I'm going to jump to compensation, which is probably what a lot of people want to talk about. So the average in this cohort was about $80,000. But if you look at those that had 3+ years experience, it was anywhere from 90 to 98,000. And it's usually in the neighborhood of a 65-35 split or 70-30 split between OTE and the variable. And the variable is usually based off of meetings scheduled or meetings held. That would be the one I would just stick with if I was getting started at first. Make it very simple, very straightforward. As you get going and you start seeing success, you can add more of a quality component to it, which would be the converted meetings. I don't recommend you comp SDRs on close one business, especially if you're selling large deal sizes. If those are taking 9 months, a year to close, SDRs could care less about that, and they may be off and going before that makes, that incents their behavior in any way, shape, or form. So don't do that, especially early on. Activities, again, here's some activity levels, daily activities. The top 20% was actually doing 115 activities a day. So lots of activity, lots of volume. Here's the types of, again, tech stack that they were using. And the difference was really in data and really getting a lot more for your contact and account data and intelligence, and in using a sales engagement platform. And questions.
Great. Well, we went through quite a bit of areas of building an SDR function. We do have several questions. We have several minutes left, so let's try to get through as many as we can. Okay, so first question from the audience: how might you advise training SDRs on learning the POV of the ICP, point of view of your ideal customer profile, and how to get them to embrace a product?
So, I mean, I think, how do they learn about your, benefits, the challenges, is really by, you've got to tell them at this early stage, what are you guys finding? What does, if you're selling into the CIO, what problems are you solving for the CIO? And what's your business value? And you have to provide them that information at this point in time. You don't, actually, no matter even what stage, thinking an SDR is going to be able to come in and understand all of that and figure out on their own is a crapshoot and probably not going to happen. So whether they're talking to marketing, product marketing, if you do have people in support or in more like a customer success role, that is talking to current customers, whoever is talking to your current customers and can gain some insights on that is really critical. I would say it's less about the product than it is about understanding the buyers, your market, the challenges that they have, and the business value that you provide.
Absolutely. 100% agree with that. I was waiting for you to mention that, which is, in my experience, when I used to be in-house and ran SDR teams, their SDRs will learn product over time. They're not expected to understand everything about a product. And also, depending on the organization, but most of the SDRs teams that I work with, they're not the ones actually doing the demo. Right. Usually they set the meeting and AE takes over and there's a handoff and we have best practices and all that. But in that kind of scenario, I've always made sure that the SDRs know how to dig into the needs, the pain points, asking the right questions, as opposed to just simply regurgitating, this is what our product does. Because in order to move a prospect further down their journey and understand how to solve their problems, you got to really understand what it is they're looking for, right? So I almost over-indexed on training SDRs, especially early on ICP, how to recognize for needs and pain and analyzing that. So 100% agree. All right, so we have time for maybe a couple more questions and then we'll wrap up. So let's address this one. How important is persistence in terms of retries versus new attempts? So this is probably in the context of outbound SDR, right? Should they keep going after the same prospects or move on to a new prospect?
So when you set up, I mean, one of the key things for an SDR is we know that it takes, especially in outbound prospecting, it takes anywhere from 8 to 10 tries to reach people. And so persistence is necessary if they're going to do it. They can't just expect to try once or twice and they're going to reach the people. They'll never reach anybody and have any success. So setting up that sequence or cadence that says, I'm going to do 12 steps over 20 days, and what each step is, how many days apart, and is it, again, I'm going to start my day one, a phone and an email. Maybe day two, which is 3 days later, is a LinkedIn outreach, right? And then you keep going. It's critical. You have to do multiple attempts to reach people. Once you hit that 12, attempts and you haven't reached them, then I would put them back into a recycle, maybe for 6 months out. And then you add in a new.
Excellent. Okay, let's close with one last question and then we'll wrap it up. And so this question, I'm actually a little bit hesitant to close with this question because it's a very big question. Okay, so this question is, how can you quantify the contribution of inbound in the success of outbound efforts? So things like, you've got outbound and inbound. So you've got outbound, your SDR is doing outbound, but you probably also have, other programs running like content, SEO. So how do you think about, how those things potentially can overlap and influence each other?
For me, coming from the sales side of things, I think that's a great problem to have. The more awareness, the more people are buzzing about us, the better off for us as a company as a whole. So I don't necessarily want to worry about attribution between inbound and outbound. I do want to know if I am is anybody responding to campaigns that I'm doing, right? If I'm spending money running LinkedIn ads, are we getting anything for that? Or did we get a big fat zero? You want to be able to understand what that cost is, but if it's melding into, you don't want to get in fights over, did we get this opportunity or meeting because it came from inbound or outbound? It should all be under one. Yeah. Tell me what any thoughts on that?
Yeah, the short answer is there's a lot. The short answer is if you have the means and have the ability to bring on some sort of, you mentioned attribution, there is a category of solutions out there that focuses specifically on that, identifying attribution and what's working and what's not in terms of guiding you towards a specific goal. In reality, right, B2B, and especially in larger ACV type of deals, and as you go up market, it's a very complex process. No one's gonna buy, $100,000 plus ACV type of contract from you because they saw one message. They're gonna put it into a shopping cart and click checkout by entering their company credit card. That's not how B2B works, right? And so the reality is there's going to be a lot of points of engagement, a lot of touch points. And if your go-to-market team and strategy is working well and they're working in alignment, it's all going to help towards helping you build pipeline and close deals, right? And so one of the biggest takeaways that I probably would leave, those of you who are still here, if you're running an organization, if you're CEO, don't do your go-to-market teams a disservice by inadvertently creating silos, by saying, hey, you're only doing outbound and you're doing inbound. You're doing sales, you're doing marketing. Because by doing so, you're creating silos that don't have to be there, and you're making it much more difficult for those two teams to achieve their goals. Because in reality, the prospect doesn't really care if you're bringing value and you're guiding them down their buyer journey. Then it's going to be, like I said earlier, all bound, inbound, outbound. It doesn't matter what you call it, in my opinion, right? SDRs are going to reach out with messages. Marketing is going to put out content, thought leadership, and different things like that, right? So don't do your team a disservice by creating these silos that don't have to be there. Okay, so we're a little bit over time. Next steps, you can see our email addresses, Sally's email, sduby@bridgegroupinc.com. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to her. Definitely reach out to me, especially if you are a Mucker portfolio company. Definitely can help you in various areas around growth, especially specifically in SDRs. If there are interesting topics that you'd like to have us cover, email Britton@muckercapital.com and we'll try to get those lined up. And then lastly, if you're not part of the Mucker family and you are a founder, consider applying to our accelerator program. And you can see where to do that by going to our website, mucker.com/muckerlab-accelerator. If you just go to the website, you'll be able to find it. All right, that concludes our webinar. I know we went over, there was a lot to cover. Obviously, this won't be the only session on the topic of SDRs. We'll probably have Sally have you back. And yeah, thank you so much for spending time with us. And until
Thank
our
you.
next session,